Hi everybody, today we are going to be creating real-life linear equations. So today, since we're doing real-life linear equations, we are essentially going to be working with some word problems. And anytime that we're going to do word problems, I'm going to say this phrase, use your desk, so D-E-S-C. So desk helps us remember the process that we're going to follow every time we have a word problem. So the D in desk is going to stand for define your variables. I want to know in words, what does X represent and what does Y represent in terms of your word problem. The E in desk represents equation because after we define our variables, we're going to make an equation. Then we're going to do the S, which is to solve. So we're going to solve our equation for whatever they're asking for. And then the C in desk is to write a complete sentence. So we're always going to answer these word problems with a complete and thorough sentence. So every time I say use your desk, it means define your variables, make an equation, solve, and then complete sentence. Okay, so today, like I said, we're going to be making linear equations from real-life examples. So we're going to be doing this with y equals mx plus b, our slope-intercept form. So it is kind of useful to know what some of these different variables might represent. So let's start with y. So y is always going to be what we are trying to find. What we're trying to find. And you also might call this, or you might hear it called the dependent variable. Dependent, because this outcome is going to depend on some other input. So our y is always going to depend on what we choose for x, which brings us to x. So x is what we choose. And we call this the independent variable. And it can be what we choose or what we change. So this is the thing that we pick, and this is what we get out of it. So this is why this is the independent variable. We can pick whatever we want. Our y will depend on what our x is, so that's why they call it the dependent variable. Now we still have m and b, so these are going to be things that we can pull out of our word problem. So b is what we call a constant. So a constant is something that never changes, so you can think of it like that. And in these types of word problems, our constant is going to be our starting value. So anytime we're starting with a certain amount, that's going to be our constant, and we can put that value right here. Now m, as we know, m represents slope, which is change of y over change of x. In word problems, m is going to be how much we change, which kind of makes sense for the slope because slope is how much you change going from one point to the next. So we can kind of use these guidelines to help us look at words and translate them into a math equation. Now, a few other keywords that it might be useful to know is anytime you see the word each or per, like Miss Reddy has 20 students per class, that is going to tell us to multiply those values. And anytime you see the words starting with or initial amount, that is going to represent that constant value, which goes where our b value is. So those are just little hints that we might use to help us. Okay, so let's give one of these a try. So we're going to use our desk, but before we do that, we're going to read the equation, and I'm going to highlight some important information. So Miss Ruddy opens a retirement account and is starting with $100. So I go to a bank and I want to start saving for retirement. So I open a bank account and this is how much I'm starting with. She plans to add $50 each month to the account. So this is how much my account is going to change each month. So we want to make an equation that describes the amount of money in the account each month. So the first thing we're going to do, again, the first letter of DESC is D, which stands for defining your variables. So I want to know, what does X represent and what does Y represent? So remember, X represents the only thing that we can change in this equation. So we can't change the starting amount. We can't change how much money Miss Ready is adding each month, but we can change which month it is or how many months have gone by. So the number of months is what we're going to pick. So that's our X value, is the number of months. Now remember, our Y value is always going to represent what we're trying to find, and we want to describe the amount of money in the account. So that's what our Y value is going to equal, the money in the account. Now, of course, the amount of money in the account is going to depend on how many months has gone by. So that's why X is the independent and Y is the dependent. So to repeat that, the amount of the money in the account depends on how many months has gone by. So this is the dependent variable and this is the independent variable. So we just finished the D in DESC. We defined X and Y. We defined our variables. Now the E in DESC tells us to make an equation. So we know we're going to use Y equals mx plus b. Now let's think about what our m value is. So remember, m is how much something is changing. So here I see, oh, we're adding $50 each month. I also want to remind you, each tells us to multiply. So we have 50 multiplied by months, which is represented by x. So 50 times x is 50x. Now, I want to remind you guys also that B value is always going to be our starting amount, and it says that Miss Ready is starting with $100, so we say plus 100. And this is the equation that we can use to find the amount of money in the account for however many months she's been saving. So this kind of makes sense, right? Let's say I'm saving for 3 months. I'm going to do 50 times 3 because I've gone to the bank 3 times and put $50 in. But of course, I also have that starting amount of 100. Now, you might think, well, why can't I just solve it like that? Because if you're looking way down the line, let's say I'm thinking maybe 50 months from now, you're not going to want to sit there and say 50 plus 50 plus 50 plus 50 that many times. So if we can make an equation to represent the amount of money, it saves us a lot of time. So now let's do the S in DESC. We want to solve what they're asking. So down here, they're asking how much money does Miss Ready have after 6 months and then after 12 months. So remember, months is represented by X. So we're going to substitute X equals 6 and X equals 12 to help us find our Y value, which will represent how much money. So let's substitute X equals 6. So we have 50 times 6 plus 100. 50 times 6 is 300 plus 100 is 400. And now we're going to do the same thing, except X will equal 12. So 50 times 12 plus 100. 50 times 12 is 600 plus 100 is 700. So this is really nice. We have a correct answer. However, if someone asked how much money does Miss Ready have after 6 months and you said Y equals 400, that doesn't really make sense in terms of a real life problem. So we're going to want to try to write this answer as a complete and thorough sentence that answers the question. So how much money does Miss Ready have after 6 months? We're going to start with after 6 months, Miss Ready has $400. So this is the kind of complete sentence I would expect. Let's answer that second part. How much money does Miss Ready have after 12 months? So we can say after 12 months, Miss Ready has $700. And this is going to be our final answer. However, we need to show every step of the way. You need to define your variables, make your equation, solve, and write a complete sentence. Okay, let's try one more together. So here, Mr. Lamb wants to create a library of books in his classroom. He is starting with 12 books. He plans to buy 3 new books each week. Create an equation that describes the number of books Mr. Lamb has each week. So let's start by defining our variables. So X is going to be the thing that we control, and the only thing that we can control is the number of weeks. We can say, oh, after 1 week, after 5 weeks, after 20 weeks, it doesn't matter. So X represents the number of weeks. That's the thing that we can change. Y is always going to represent what we want to find. And they ask us to describe the number of books Mr. Lamb has. So Y is going to represent the total number of books. So that's the D in desk. We are defining our variables using real words. Now we need to, make an equation. So we're going to do Y equals. So here I can see that the number of books is changing by 3 each week. So we can take 3 and multiply it by the number of weeks he's been adding to his library, which is 3x. Now, this does not represent the total number of books he has because he started with some. So we have to add that starting 12 onto the end. So remember, the constant is always going to go right here. So the constant is our starting point, which is 12. And our slope is always going to be how much our value is changing. And it is changing by 3 each week. So that's why we say 3x. And this is the equation that can help us find how many books Mr. Lamb has for whatever number of weeks we want. So now let's figure out how many books does Mr. Lamb have after 5 weeks and 10 weeks. So this is the thing that we choose. So we're choosing x equals 5 and x equals 10, and we're going to substitute to solve for y. So we have 3 times 5 plus 12. We always multiply first, so 15 plus 12, which is 27. And then let's substitute x equals 10. 3 times 10 plus 12. Here we have 30 plus 12, which equals 42. Now, once again, we're always going to write our final answer as a complete sentence, and it needs to answer the question thoroughly. So how many books does Mr. Lamb have after 5 weeks? After 5 weeks, Mr. Lamb has 27 books. And we can do the same for the second part. How many books does Mr. Lamb have after 10 weeks? We say, after 10 weeks, Mr. Lamb has 42 books. Okay, go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to give this one a try. It says Miss Reddy has created an Instagram account and started with 3 followers. Her mom, her dad, and her sister. She plans to find 7 new followers each day. Create an equation that describes how many followers she has each day. So go ahead and pause the video and make sure you're using your desk. Define, make an equation, solve, and complete sentence. All right, let's go ahead and check. So here, X is going to represent the number of days because that's the only thing that we can pick and choose. And Y is going to represent what we're trying to find, which is how many followers Miss Reddy has. So if we create the equation, we should get Y equals 7x plus 3 because this number is how much change we have multiplied by the number of days. And this number represents the starting value, which was 3 followers. Now, let's move on to the S part of desk, solving. They ask how many followers will she have after 10 days, so substitute X equals 10. And 100 days, so substitute X equals 100. Last, we have to write as a complete sentence. So after 10 days, Miss Reddy has 73 followers. And after 100 days, Miss Reddy has 703 followers. All right, that is all for today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching.